There are certain emotional states that refuse to adhere to the principle of conservation. They linger not as faded memories, but as vivid, pressurized presences that occupy the body long after the originating moment has passed, sometimes years after the catalyst has vanished entirely. We are not speaking merely of recollection, which is the brain retrieving a file, but of somatization, the physical embodiment of a past vulnerability, manifesting as a persistent, low-level hum of anxiety that settles in the diaphragm, tightens the chest, or manifests as that hollow, nauseating void in the stomach. This phenomenon is the signature of emotional gravity, a relentless pull exerted by something that is either distant, unavailable, or definitively gone. It answers the fundamental, agonizing question that plagues so many who understand intellectually that a toxic cycle must cease but remain physiologically incapable of initiating the release. Why can't I let go, even when every rational fiber in my being screams for freedom? The answer is that the attachment, once formed, is not merely a cognitive conclusion. It becomes a structural anchor, integrated into the nervous system's core architecture, and the attempt to sever it feels less like healthy separation and more like a profound, dangerous act of self-mutilation. When we discuss deep attachment, particularly the kind laced with dependency and the corrosive fear of abandonment, we are observing the adult nervous system reverting to an infantile state of hypervigilance. The brain, trained early on to associate the presence of a specific external source with safety, or perhaps more accurately, to associate the pursuit of that source with the potential for safety, becomes hopelessly addicted to the signal. This is the mechanism of intermittent reinforcement, the psychological slot machine that generates the most stubborn forms of addiction, be they substance or relational. The absence of the signal, the silence, the unmet expectation, the sudden withdrawal, does not register as simple absence. It registers as an existential threat. The limbic system, the ancient sentinel dedicated to survival, throws open the floodgates. Cortisol spikes, adrenaline pumps, the heart rate accelerates slightly, waiting not for danger, but for confirmation of connection. This state of perpetual anticipation is neurologically indistinguishable from being actively pursued by a predator. Yet, the source of the danger is not externalized. It is housed in the absence itself. The terror of the void is paramount. Nature and the human psyche abhor a vacuum, especially a relational one. When the emotional link is severed, or even just suspended in agonizing uncertainty, the brain races to fill the gap. It produces elaborate narratives, rehearsals of future conversations, obsessive reviews of past interactions, and constant frantic checks of the external world, the phone, the inbox, the time. This behavioral pattern is not laziness or lack of willpower. It is the desperate, high-energy work of the anxious attachment style attempting to regulate an internal system that has lost its primary, external thermostat. Homeostasis has been threatened, and the system is demanding correction, immediate and overwhelming. The physical toll of this maintenance is staggering. This sustained hyperarousal leads to chronic fatigue that no amount of sleep can alleviate, because the sleep itself is fractured by the body's inability to truly disarm. The chest remains tight, locked down against the intrusion of genuine rest. The stomach churns because the vagus nerve is perpetually signaling distress. We are essentially exhausting ourselves fighting a battle that is no longer being waged in the present moment, but is instead being fought against a ghost from a prior encounter, or perhaps a ghost from decades past. Consider Sarah, a woman caught in the relentless orbit of a partner, let us call him Mark, who has perfected the art of strategic withdrawal. Mark is not a villain, necessarily, but he is an artist of unavailability, offering just enough proximity to establish the bond, followed by stretches of silence that range from days to weeks. Sarah knows, in the quiet clarity of her 3 a.m. insomnia, that this dynamic is corrosive. She understands that she is deserving of consistency, respect, and unequivocal presence. Yet, her body behaves like a compass fixed upon magnetic north, regardless of the terrain. The emotional gravity Mark exerts is strongest in his absence. When he is physically present, the anxiety temporarily subsides, replaced by a fleeting, brittle sense of relief. But the moment the door closes behind him, or the text chain goes cold, the process of somatic siege begins anew. Sarah enters what we might call the waiting state. The waiting state is a psychological purgatory where all forward momentum is suspended. Her personal timeline freezes. A dinner invitation from a friend, a deadline at work, a planned trip, all become secondary concerns, mere background noise against the deafening silence of the phone. She glances at it constantly, not for the time, but for the notification bubble, the confirmation that she still exists in his peripheral awareness. This anxious waiting is a deeply physical experience. Her shoulders lift unconsciously, holding tension she cannot discharge. She finds herself shallow breathing, taking in just enough air to sustain the state of alert, but never enough to signal safety to her lower brain centers. She eats erratically, either consuming small, rapid bites fueled by nervous energy, or entirely forgetting meals because the internal distress signal has suppressed appetite. When the phone does not ring, the lack of confirmation is interpreted by her limbic system as personal failure, as evidence of her unworthiness. The thought loop begins. If I were better, smarter, or thinner, he wouldn't need to withdraw. This cognitive distortion is the mind's attempt to restore a sense of control over a fundamentally uncontrollable situation. If she can find the flaw within herself, she can theoretically fix it, thus guaranteeing the connection. This illusion of control is preferable to the terrifying vulnerability of acknowledging that her safety and worth are dependent upon the unpredictable whim of another person. Sarah doesn't just miss Mark. She misses the regulation he briefly provided. His presence was a temporary, albeit highly toxic analgesic for the underlying anxiety that has been resident in her system since childhood. The emotion that stays long after the moment, the abandonment anxiety, is not just about Mark. Mark is merely the current, highly accessible trigger point for a wound that originated long ago in the volatile landscape of early attachment. The intensity of Sarah's reaction is disproportionate to the current situation because the nervous system is reacting to a compounded trauma, layering the current silence onto the memory of a caregiver's unpredictable departure, a parent's sudden coldness, or the constant threat of being overlooked. When the original source of comfort was unreliable, the growing adult is programmed to perpetually chase, to overfunction, and to endure painful inconsistency simply because that inconsistency, however damaging, is a known quantity. It is the definition of love that the child's brain constructed for survival. This brings us inevitably to the origin story, the blueprint of emotional gravity. Attachment theory elucidates this clearly. The anxious dependent is not simply choosing a difficult path. They are executing a successful, albeit maladaptive, strategy for managing fundamental uncertainty. Imagine the infant whose primary caregiver is sometimes warm and present, providing deep, resonant connection, but sometimes suddenly withdrawn, emotionally cold, or entirely preoccupied. The infant cannot process this as a failing of the caregiver. The infant processes it as a failure of the self. The core lesson absorbed is that connection is not a given. It is a precarious, earned privilege. Furthermore, the highest state of emotional urgency is achieved not during the presence of the caregiver, but during the search for the caregiver. The highest reward is the relief of reunion, and it is the pursuit, the desperate longing and waiting that reinforces the neural pathways of dependency. We become addicted to the drama of reunion, allowing the brief high of relief to overshadow the immense, draining pain of the preceding pursuit. In adulthood, we unconsciously seek out partners who replicate this exact pattern of intermittent reinforcement because the nervous system recognizes the pattern, even if the conscious mind finds it appalling. The tension of the pursuit feels paradoxically like familiarity, like coming home to a state of perpetual, agitated vigilance. Consequently, the feeling that stays long after the moment is the residue of that early, frantic search. When Mark withdraws, Sarah is not just dealing with the loss of a phone call. She is reliving the historical, body-encoded trauma of being 6 years old, waiting at the kitchen table for a parent who promised to be home and is now inexplicably hours late. The body does not parse the difference in scale or context. It only registers the signal. Abandonment is possible. Red alert. The cost of maintaining this emotional gravity well is profound, reaching far beyond the confines of the specific relationship. This is the cost of sustained energetic devotion to the pursuit of an absent entity. First, there is the catastrophic loss of personal chronology. When the emotional state is tethered to the actions of another, the individual's own life grinds to a halt. Sarah cannot plan a vacation, accept a promotion, or even commit to a long-term hobby, because her energy reserves are constantly allocated to crisis management, the crisis being the potential threat of abandonment. Her future is always conditional, perpetually dependent on Mark's next move, his next text, or his eventual unpredictable reappearance. Furthermore, this constant emotional output leads to profound identity erosion. The self becomes defined not by inherent qualities or achieved goals, but by proximity to the attachment figure. The question shifts from, who am I and what do I value, to, am I still wanted? The self becomes a receptacle for external validation, losing its internal compass. When the validation is withdrawn, the self collapses into a fearful, reactive state. The exhaustion is not just mental, it is spiritual. To live in a state of hypervigilance means to be constantly preparing for a fight or a flight that never fully materializes. The body's resources are depleted fighting ghosts, leaving nothing left for the actual, joyful, creative work of living. Sleep becomes restless, appetite vanishes, and the capacity for joy, that most delicate and necessary of human functions, shrivels. Why invest in joy when the alert system might require immediate activation? Joy requires safety, and safety is the one thing the limbic system refuses to acknowledge as present. Yet, this seemingly inescapable gravity is subject to conscious rerouting. The shift begins not by attempting the impossible act of letting go, which the body interprets as self-betrayal, but by the far more manageable and critical act of radical awareness. The gravity well of attachment only retains its power as long as we mistake the historical emotion for a current imperative. We must learn to differentiate the feeling from the fact. When the chest tightens and the stomach drops in the waiting state, the first step is to name the experience, not the cause. Do not say, I'm worried Mark won't call. Say, my nervous system is currently reacting to an historical trigger of abandonment, generating cortisol and muscle tension. This subtle linguistic shift is an immense act of power. It relocates the issue from an external relationship failure to an internal physiological regulation challenge. Once the feeling is acknowledged as a historical artifact, we can begin the work of comforting the internal system that feels under siege. This is where the somatic practice becomes crucial. The tight chest, the shallow breath, these are physiological instructions for sustained vigilance. The counter-instruction is to breathe deep into that restriction, not superficially, but deliberately, driving the breath down into the pelvis, signaling to the vagus nerve that the crisis is over, even if the feeling persists. It is the practice of breathing through the gravity rather than attempting to outrun it. This process is not instantaneous. It is a slow, methodical repatterning of deep neural structures. Each time Sarah feels the anxiety spike, she has a choice. She can pick up the phone and check the status of the external thermostat, Mark, thereby reinforcing the dependency pathway. Or she can acknowledge the spike, breathe, and turn her attention, her precious, finite energy, back onto her own life, onto her own chronology. This is not about denying the longing, it is about refusing to fund it. She must ask, am I willing to trade my present peace for the potential relief of future validation? And increasingly, the answer must be no. The genuine act of letting go is not a violent severing. It is a gradual, intentional withdrawal of attention. It is the slow, agonizing, but ultimately liberating process of reorienting the compass needle back toward the true magnetic north, the sovereign self. It requires acknowledging the pain of the phantom limb, the body's insistence that something vital is missing, but refusing to construct an entire life around the ache. We must tolerate the terrible quiet that follows the end of the drama, allowing the space once occupied by anxious pursuit to be slowly, organically filled by the simple, unwavering presence of self. This is how we defeat emotional gravity, not by escaping the pull, but by building a counterforce so immense, so stable, that the old orbit collapses into irrelevance, leaving us finally free to move forward on our own trajectory.